There is a phrase at the center of one of the most studied books in the literature of personal transformation, a phrase repeated across its chapters like a refrain, named in its very title. And yet, despite decades of study, despite thousands of devoted readers, despite an entire industry of commentary built around it, almost no one can state it with precision. Ask any serious student of Wallace Wattles what the certain way is, and you will receive one of two answers. The first is a philosophical summary, something about thinking from abundance, acting with gratitude, avoiding competition. The second is an honest admission that they cannot quite put it into a single clear statement. Both answers point to the same problem. The certain way is the central subject of the science of getting rich. Its name is referenced throughout the book, and yet Wattles never states it as a formula in one place. He distributes it. He embeds it within philosophy and narrative. He presents each element in a different chapter without ever assembling the complete sequence in explicit terms. This documentary exists to do what Wattles chose not to do: assemble the formula from the source text in the correct sequence with the precision of a practitioner who needs to know exactly what they are doing. This was not an oversight. Wattles wrote with extraordinary economy. Every chapter of the science of getting rich earns its place. Every sentence carries functional weight, and nothing was left in or left out without deliberate reason. He distributed the formula elements across chapters 4, 7, 11, 13, and 14 because he understood something about the nature of formulaic knowledge that most modern readers have forgotten. A formula presented as a numbered list will be applied as a technique. It will be performed sequentially, checked off, treated as a procedure, executed rather than inhabited. By embedding each element within the philosophical argument that explains why that element works, Wattles ensured that the serious student would arrive at the formula already understanding its inner logic. The sequence would not be arbitrary steps, but a chain of causes and effects that the student had already traced. There is a deeper implication to this architectural decision, and it bears holding for a moment. Wattles was not writing a self-help manual. He was writing what he explicitly called a science, a systematic account of laws that operate with the same mechanical precision as the laws of chemistry or physics. A scientist does not ask you to follow a protocol without first establishing the principles that make the protocol valid. Wattles follows the same method. He builds the philosophical foundation first, and only then does behavior become explicable as expression. The formula, for him, was the visible surface of a much deeper structure, and to present the surface without the structure would have been to give the student a map without a territory. But this architectural decision carries a cost that Wattles, writing for a different reader in a different age, may not have fully anticipated. Most readers do not reconstruct. They absorb. They move through the chapters sequentially, receive each element as it appears, and carry it forward as general impression rather than as a specific operational component of a larger sequence. They work with fragments, the vision without the faith, the gratitude without the no urgency condition, the right action without the complete attention. And fragments, as Wattles himself makes plain in the logic of his own text, do not produce complete results. They produce partial results, not as failure, but as the natural consequence of an incomplete cause applied to a law that requires the complete cause to operate. The purpose of what follows is precisely stated, and it is important that you understand it before proceeding. This is not a general exploration of Wattles' philosophy, nor is it an introduction to the science of getting rich for those who have not read it. It is a reconstruction, the assembly of a complete formula from 5 source chapters, named in sequence, with each element identified by its precise function in the chain, and illustrated with Wattles' own language drawn from the chapters in which he placed it. You will leave this not with a better feeling about the certain way, but with a precise operational account of what it consists of, why each element occupies the position it does, and what happens when any element is absent or misapplied. The reconstruction proceeds in a specific order. We will first state the complete formula, all 5 elements in sequence, as they emerge from the source text. We will then examine the 2 elements that most students of this book consistently miss or misapply, because they are the elements whose function is least obvious on a first reading. We will then examine with clinical precision what failure looks like when the formula is applied partially, so that you can recognize the specific pattern of incomplete application in your own practice. We will then move to application, how the complete formula operates as a daily discipline, and how a practitioner can diagnose their own state against the formula at any moment of the day. And we will close with the formula in its final assembled form. Wattles placed everything you need in the book. The work of what follows is to do what he chose not to do, to assemble it in one place, state it without ambiguity, and present it with the precision that a serious student of these laws is entitled to possess. The certain way formula, reconstructed from chapters 4, 7, 11, 13, and 14 of the Science of Getting Rich, consists of 5 elements that must be present simultaneously and in the correct inner sequence. It is worth pausing before naming them to establish what simultaneously means in this context, because it is not metaphor. Wattles does not describe a 5-step morning procedure in which you complete one element and move to the next. He describes a state, an inner architecture, in which all 5 elements are operative at the same time, much the way all the parts of a living organism must be functioning simultaneously for the organism to be alive. Remove one part and you do not have a weaker organism. You have a different condition entirely. The first element is a clear, living, specific vision of the desired result, held as already existing in the formless substance. This is not visualization in the modern sense. It is not a picture on a vision board or a 5-minute meditation on a desired outcome. Wattles' language is precise. The vision must impress upon the formless the specific form of what is desired. The formless substance, in his framework, is the thinking stuff from which all things are made, and it responds to the impressions that the thinking mind places upon it. A vague desire places the vague impression. A living, specific vision, held with a quality of certainty about a thing that already exists, places a specific operative impression. This is not poetry. For Wattles, it is mechanism. The second element is continuous, genuine gratitude. Not occasional thanksgiving, not a gratitude list, but a fixed inner orientation toward the formless as the source of all good. Gratitude, in Wattles' framework, performs a specific function that is entirely different from its popular usage. It is the mechanism by which the mind fixes the vision as present good rather than future desire. When you are genuinely grateful for something, you are relating to it as something you already possess, or as something already given. Gratitude applied to the vision of the desired result treats that result as already present in its essential form, already given by the formless, already moving through the creative process toward its material expression. The third element is unwavering faith. And here, Wattles makes a distinction that most students miss entirely. Faith is not a precondition to be achieved separately, through effort, willpower, or repeated affirmation. It is the natural output of sustained, genuine gratitude. When gratitude is real, not performed, not practiced as technique, but genuinely felt, the felt certainty of arrival follows as naturally as warmth follows fire. Wattles places faith third in the sequence precisely because it cannot be manufactured first. A student who tries to generate faith directly through force of will is attempting to produce the effect while bypassing the cause. Gratitude is the cause. Faith is the effect. The sequence is not exchangeable. The fourth element is each present action performed completely and successfully, not as a means to a future result, but as the full expression of the creative mind in this present moment. This element requires careful unpacking because it touches something that most students of this text have misread. Wattles does not say that right action will eventually produce results if performed long enough. He says that each action, performed completely, with full attention, without withheld energy, without internal reservation about whether the process is working, is itself the expression of the creative mind already operating in the desired state. The action is not the instrument of arrival. The action is the expression of one who has already arrived in consciousness. The fifth element is the total absence of urgency, anxiety, and competitive thought throughout the performance of every action. Wattles places this element last in the naming sequence, but its function is not sequential. It is pervasive. It is the condition under which every other element must operate in order to function correctly. A vision held with urgency is not the certain way. Gratitude practiced with underlying anxiety is not the certain way. Faith tinged with fear of failure is not the certain way. The absence of urgency is not a pleasant addition to an otherwise complete formula. It is the atmospheric condition without which the formula cannot become operative. These five elements, present simultaneously in the correct inner sequence, constitute the certain way as Wattles embedded it across 5 chapters. The importance of the word simultaneous cannot be overstated, and it is worth pressing on it from a different angle. Consider any state of genuine creative flow, the condition in which a craftsman, a thinker, or an artist is so completely absorbed in the present work that there is no awareness of time, no anxiety about outcome, and no division between the worker and the work. In such a state, all 5 elements are present whether the person has named them or not. There is a clear sense of what is being created. There is a felt satisfaction in the act of creating. There is certainty, not hope, about the nature of what is being done. The action is complete, no energy withheld, no attention divided, and there is no urgency because urgency requires a gap between where one is and where one wishes to be, and in that state, no such gap is felt. Wattles is not inventing a technique. He is naming the structure of a state that human beings already know exists, and then asking, what if this were the permanent condition from which all action proceeds? This is where the philosophy deepens into something that requires genuine engagement rather than passive reception. The certain way, as a permanent inner architecture, is not a meditation practice or a morning ritual. It is a claim about the only inner condition from which the laws of creative substance can be engaged with precision and reliability. Every other condition, urgency, anxiety, vague desire, performed gratitude, manufactured faith, places an impression on the formless, but not the impression of certainty and creative dominance. Those impressions place the image of a person who is still waiting, still straining, still outside the thing they seek. And the formless, which responds to impression with mechanical precision, responds accordingly. There is a question worth placing here, not to be answered hastily. Have you ever, in your practice of this material, been in all 5 elements at the same time? Not across a morning routine, not sequentially across a day, but all 5 simultaneously in a single, undivided inner state? If the answer is uncertain, or if the question itself reveals that you have never considered the formula as a simultaneous architecture, then you now understand with precision what has been missing. Not effort, not sincerity, not more knowledge. The 5 elements operating at the same time in the correct inner sequence. The dependency chain between the elements reveals something else of great importance. The formula cannot be entered at any arbitrary point. You cannot begin with faith and work backward to vision. You cannot begin with right action and hope that gratitude and faith will arise from the doing. The chain has a specific direction, and it runs from vision to gratitude to faith to action to the pervading absence of urgency, in that order, because each element is the necessary precondition of the next. This is what Wattles means when he speaks of the certain way as a science. A scientific law does not permit the reordering of causes and effects according to personal preference. You do not first produce light and then ignite the fuel. The sequence is the law. What follows from this is an uncomfortable recognition for many students of this text, and it is better to state it plainly than to soften it. Most of what passes as application of the certain way in modern practice is an attempt to enter the formula at the wrong point. Vision boards entered without genuine gratitude. Affirmations of faith recited without the vision that gives faith its object. Actions taken from urgency and labeled as right action because their content points in the desired direction. These are not partial applications of the certain way. They are different practices entirely operating on different principles, or on no coherent principle at all. The certain way is specific. Its requirements are stated. The law does not bend to accommodate incomplete conditions. It is also worth examining what Wattles means by the phrase, "in the formless substance," when he describes where the vision must be held. He does not mean an abstract imaginative space or a private mental theater. He means something more precise. The vision must be held as a form that exists in the undifferentiated creative substance from which all material things take their origin. This is the metaphysical dimension of the formula that most practical-minded readers quietly set aside, and in doing so, they remove the mechanism that makes the formula operational. Wattles is not speaking metaphorically when he describes the formless substance as thinking stuff that responds to the thoughts of a thinking mind. He is stating what he regards as a discoverable, repeatable law of nature. The vision is not a motivational image. It is an impression placed upon the creative medium of the universe, and its precision, its vividness, and the quality of certainty with which it is held determine what the medium receives and what it moves to produce. Gratitude, as the second element, is perhaps the most misunderstood component of the entire formula. Not because it is subtle, but because it has been rendered unrecognizable by a century of popular usage. In the vocabulary of modern wellness, gratitude is a mood regulation practice, a way of shifting attention from what is absent to what is present, with measurable effects on subjective well-being. This is not what Wattles means. Gratitude, in his framework, is a relational act. It is the act of acknowledging the formless as the source from which all things come, and of receiving the vision as already given from that source. Genuine gratitude, in this sense, is the act of the mind that treats the desired result as an already completed gift, not a future gift, not a hoped-for gift, a gift received. This is why gratitude is the element that fixes the vision as present reality, rather than future desire. And this is why its genuineness is not a matter of feeling good, but a matter of the inner stance it establishes. Faith, as the third element, demands examination from the angle of what produces it rather than what it feels like. Students who attempt to generate faith through repeated self-suggestion, through affirmations, or through deliberate suppression of doubt have mistaken an effect for a cause. Faith, the felt certainty of arrival, is not something the will can manufacture directly. It is the natural state of a mind that has sustained genuine gratitude for long enough that the vision has been fully fixed as present reality in consciousness. The way a tuning fork struck near a piano string causes the corresponding string to vibrate in sympathy, not by direct action, but by resonant correspondence. Genuine gratitude, sustained, causes faith to arise as a natural vibrational consequence. The practitioner's task is not to generate faith. It is to deepen and sustain the gratitude until faith is the inevitable result. The fourth element, complete present action, is the one most likely to be misread by students who already understand that action is necessary. The misreading is this: right action is understood as correct behavior in the world, aimed at the desired result, taken consistently over time. What Wattles actually prescribes is different in a way that transforms everything. The completeness of the action, the requirement that no energy be withheld, that no attention be divided between the present act and the desired future result, is not a quality of the action's external execution. It is a quality of the inner state from which the action proceeds. A letter written completely, with full attention and zero anxiety about whether the reply will come, places a different impression on the formless than the same letter written with one part of the mind monitoring whether this is working. The action is complete when the whole person is in it. That is the condition Wattles requires. The sequence is a dependency chain, not a preference or a suggestion about the order in which practices might feel most natural. This distinction must be established with a kind of precision that Wattles himself, applied to the subject, because the most common error in applying the certain way is to treat the 5 elements as components that can be assembled in any order or used selectively or strengthened individually as needed. This is not how a dependency chain operates. In a chain of causes and effects, removing or reordering one link does not produce a weaker version of the same outcome. It produces a different outcome, or no outcome at all. Vision must come first in the sequence because it provides the specific impression that the formless substance is to receive. This is not a philosophical position about the importance of knowing what you want. It is a mechanistic requirement. The formless responds to the specific form of the impression placed upon it. Without a clear, living, specific vision, held with the quality of a thing already existing, the practitioner has no definite object toward which to direct the subsequent elements. Gratitude without a specific object is a diffuse warmth. Faith without a specific image is indistinguishable from general optimism. Right action without a specific vision of the desired result is industry without direction. The vision is the first cause in the chain. Without it, none of the subsequent elements can perform their designated function. Gratitude's position as the second element is determined by its specific causal function. It is the mechanism by which the vision is fixed in consciousness, as a present good rather than a future aspiration. This is a critical distinction that deserves the full weight of attention. The natural position of a person who has a vision of something they wish to achieve is the position of someone who does not yet have it, who is looking forward to a desired future state. That inner position, the position of wanting, of not yet having, is precisely the impression of absence that the formless receives and mirrors. Gratitude is the corrective. To be genuinely grateful for the vision is to receive it as already given, already present in its essential form, already moving through the creative process toward its material expression. Gratitude transforms the inner position from that of the desiring one to that of the receiving one. This is why it must follow vision. It cannot perform this transformation without the specific image that vision provides. Faith's emergence from sustained genuine gratitude is perhaps the most important logical step in the entire chain, and it is the one most often misunderstood or reversed by students who place faith earlier in the sequence. The error is understandable. Faith sounds like a precondition, something you must have before anything else can proceed. And in a general sense, some basic orientation of faith is necessary even to begin the practice. But Wattles is speaking of faith in its operational, fully realized form, the unwavering certainty of arrival that characterizes the certain way in its complete state. This level of faith cannot be generated by an act of will. It cannot be produced by suppressing doubt, by repeating affirmations, or by working oneself into a state of emotional confidence. It arises, naturally, inevitably, when genuine gratitude has been sustained with enough consistency and depth that the vision has been fully received by consciousness as a present reality. The faith that follows is not the hope that something might work. It is the certainty of one who already knows. Right action occupies the fourth position in the chain because it is the physical expression of the certainty that faith produces. This placement reveals something essential about the nature of action in Wattles' framework, that fundamentally distinguishes it from any standard account of goal-directed behavior. Action, in conventional terms, is instrumental. It is the means by which a desired end is pursued and eventually achieved. Wattles does not dismiss action. He insists upon it, and he insists that it be vigorous, complete, and present. But he reframes what action is. In the certain way, action is not the pursuit of the result. It is the expression of one who is already in the consciousness of the result. The difference is not semantic. It is the difference between an action that originates from a position of wanting and an action that originates from a position of having. The inner origin of the action is what determines the quality of the impression it places on the formless, and therefore what conditions it moves to create. The fifth element, the total absence of urgency, anxiety, and competitive thought, occupies a peculiar position in the dependency chain because it does not operate sequentially in the way the first four elements do. It is better understood as the atmospheric condition of the entire chain, rather than as its final link. Urgency and anxiety are not merely uncomfortable feelings that reduce the effectiveness of the practice. They are specific inner positions that, when present, contradict the assertions that every other element makes. Vision held with urgency says, "This is desired, but not yet present." Gratitude practiced with anxiety says, "I am grateful, but I am also afraid that the thing I am grateful for may not arrive." Faith accompanied by worry is not the felt certainty of arrival. It is hope wearing the costume of faith. And action taken with urgency is action from the inner position of scarcity, of not enough time, of a person who has not yet arrived and is pressing to get there. Urgency is the signal of absence. Its presence in any element of the formula announces to the formless the very condition the practitioner is attempting to transcend. This pervasive requirement for the absence of urgency has a further implication that Wattles makes explicit in Chapter 11, and which most students either miss or find too demanding to fully accept. The absence of urgency is not a state to be achieved once and maintained effortlessly. It must be actively maintained through the consistent practice of returning to vision, to genuine gratitude, and to the certainty of faith every time urgency attempts to re-enter. Wattles does not suggest that the practitioner who masters the certain way will never feel the pull of urgency or anxiety. He suggests that the practitioner of the certain way knows precisely what to do when urgency appears. Return to the first element. Re-establish the vision as a present good. Allow gratitude to fix it. Allow faith to arise. Return to the action that is complete. The formula is self-correcting, but only for the practitioner who knows the full formula and can identify which element has been disrupted. The dependency chain also exposes the structural reason why the reverse bridge, the passage from modern failure to ancient principle, is not merely a rhetorical device, but a description of something measurably real. The modern practitioner who seeks to apply the certain way without a full account of its dependency chain is not failing due to lack of sincerity, effort, or intelligence. They are failing because they are applying an incomplete set of causes to a law that requires the complete set. The law itself does not fail. It cannot fail. The law is as indifferent to incomplete application as the law of gravity is indifferent to the preferences of the person who steps off a ledge expecting a different outcome. Wattles' insistence on the word certain in the phrase "the certain way" was not rhetorical optimism. It was a precise claim about what the law guarantees when its conditions are fully met. Certainty is the property of the law. The law's certainty is available to the practitioner who meets its conditions completely. What this means in practical terms is something that deserves to be stated without qualification. If you have been applying the certain way sincerely, with genuine effort and consistent practice, and your outer conditions have not shifted in proportion to your inner work, the most probable explanation is not that the law has failed to respond, and not that you lack some ineffable quality of character that others possess. The most probable explanation is that one or more elements of the formula are missing, misapplied, or contaminated by urgency. The law is mechanical. It does not respond to effort. It responds to the complete and correct set of conditions. This is not a comfort or a discouragement. It is information. And information about the specific cause of a specific failure is the most useful thing a student of this science can possess. The dependency chain, viewed from a higher level of abstraction, describes something that natural philosophy has recognized across many traditions and centuries: the principle that a cause must be complete before it can produce a complete effect. Aristotle's account of causation, formal, material, efficient, and final, converges in its logic with Wattles' formulation. A creative act requires a definite form, a receptive medium, a force that actualizes, and a purpose that governs. The certain way maps precisely onto this structure. Vision provides the form. The formless substance is the medium. Genuine gratitude and faith provide the actualizing force, and complete present action is the purpose expressed in the material world. Remove any cause, and the effect is incomplete, not less complete, but categorically incomplete, because causes do not produce partial effects. They produce complete effects when they are complete, and nothing when they are not. There is a temptation at this point to ask whether Wattles is describing a law that operates independently of belief in it. This is a question worth confronting directly, because it points to a significant issue in how this material is typically approached. Wattles does not require the practitioner to believe in the formless substance as a philosophical or theological commitment before the law becomes operative. He requires something different: that the practitioner think and act from the inner position that the law describes. Belief in his framework is not the cause. The inner position is the cause. A practitioner who thinks from the inner position of creative certainty, who holds a living vision with genuine gratitude, who acts completely without urgency, is meeting the conditions of the law regardless of their metaphysical convictions. And a practitioner who is intellectually convinced of the law's validity, but who thinks and acts from urgency, anxiety, and incomplete attention, is not meeting the conditions, regardless of their sincerity. This distinction between belief and inner position is one of the most clarifying insights that emerges from a careful reading of the dependency chain. It dissolves the common objection that the law requires a kind of supernatural faith that not everyone is capable of. Wattles is not asking you to believe in the invisible. He is asking you to occupy a specific inner position, defined by 5 precisely named elements, and to hold that position consistently. The occupying of that position is available to any person willing to do the inner work of vision, gratitude, and sustained attention. It is demanding work, but it is not mysterious work. It is the kind of work that the dependency chain, now fully articulated, makes entirely legible. The final observation about the dependency chain is perhaps the most significant for the student who is reading this carefully. The chain, as described, operates in only one direction, from vision outward toward action and the absence of urgency. This means that the practitioner cannot work backward from action to faith, from results to gratitude, or from outer conditions to inner vision. The creative sequence runs from within to without. This is not a spiritual cliché. It is the specific directional claim that makes Wattles' science distinct from any account of achievement based on external strategies, behavioral optimization, or the leveraging of outer circumstances. The outer world is the effect. The inner architecture of the certain way is the cause. And causes, once complete, produce effects not because they are hoped for, but because the law that governs their relationship is certain. The absence of urgency is the element of the certain way that most students of the science of getting rich encounter, acknowledge, and then quietly set aside. They set it aside not because they disagree with it, but because they do not fully perceive what it is. They read it as a counsel of psychological hygiene, a reminder to remain calm, to avoid desperate energy, to not appear needy in their relationship with the universe. In this reading, the absence of urgency is a modifier of behavior, a tonal adjustment, a way of holding the other elements with a lighter grip. Wattles means something categorically different, and the difference has structural consequences that transform every other element of the formula. In Chapter 11, Wattles does not counsel the reader to relax or to practice equanimity as a desirable mental habit. He establishes a specific prohibition with precise metaphysical grounding. Never think of yourself as on the way. This phrase requires unpacking at the level of inner position rather than outer attitude. To be on the way is to occupy the inner stance of a traveler, a person who is located between departure and arrival, between the present condition and the desired one. The traveler is, by definition, not yet there, and a mind that thinks from the position of not yet, there is a mind that places upon the formless substance the impression of a person in a state of absence. The formless, which responds to impression with mechanical precision, responds to the image of absence by perpetuating the conditions of absence. This is not a metaphor. For Wattles, it is the precise description of why urgency breaks the formula. The word break is the correct word, and it must be used without softening. Urgency does not weaken the formula. It does not reduce its efficiency. It breaks it in the same way that a single incorrect variable in a chemical equation does not produce a weaker reaction, but an entirely different one. Urgency introduces into the formula an impression that directly contradicts the impression that every other element is attempting to establish. Vision places the impression of the desired result as present reality. Urgency immediately announces that this reality is not yet present and must be hastened. The two impressions cannot coexist in the same mental act. One must cancel the other, and urgency, as the stronger biological signal, the one rooted in survival instinct and evolutionary pressure, tends to be the one that survives. This is where the historical depth of Wattles' formulation becomes most striking, and where the reverse bridge executes with the full force of its intended logic. The defining psychological condition of the modern practitioner of personal development is not laziness, not cynicism, not lack of vision. It is urgency. It is the pervasive low-grade anxiety of a person who believes they are behind where they should be at their age, behind where others in their field have arrived, behind the timeline they set for themselves, behind the pace at which the law is supposed to be working. This urgency is so normalized in the culture of achievement that it is rarely identified as a problem. It presents itself as ambition, as drive, as the productive tension between where one is and where one intends to be. Wattles, writing in 1910, named this exact condition, not as a personality flaw, but as the single most common mechanism by which practitioners of creative law cancel their own results, more than a century before it became the defining psychological signature of the self-improvement era. The principle that Wattles delivers as the correction is not a prescription for passivity or for the abandonment of desire. It is a prescription for a specific quality of inner position that is more demanding, not less, than the urgency it replaces. To never think of yourself as on the way, while maintaining a clear vision, while taking vigorous daily action, while engaging fully with the outer world, requires a level of inner discipline that urgency never demands. Urgency is easy. It is the automatic response of a mind confronted with the gap between desire and current reality. The absence of urgency, maintained consistently across the full texture of daily life, is the hard work that Wattles describes as the condition of the certain way. It is not a relaxed state. It is a state of sovereign inner authority, the state of one who knows the law and therefore has no occasion for urgency, because the outcome of a correctly applied law is not in question. To understand why Wattles treats the absence of urgency as an active, indispensable element of the formula, rather than as a passive condition to be maintained, it is necessary to consider what happens in the mind when urgency is genuinely absent. The mind that is not urgency-driven is not an idle mind or a comfortable mind. It is a mind that is fully present in the current action, fully absorbed in the quality of what it is doing, fully occupied with the completeness of the present moment. This fullness, this total occupation of the present, is precisely the condition in which the impression placed upon the formless is the impression of a person who is already operating from the desired state. The absence of urgency is not a vacuum. It is a positive condition. It is the condition of presence, and presence is the only inner state from which complete action, the fourth element of the formula, can genuinely proceed. There is another dimension to the no urgency element that Wattles establishes in Chapter 11, and that is almost universally missed in popular treatments of this text: the explicit connection between urgency and competitive thought. Wattles regards the competitive plane of mind, the plane on which one thinks in terms of taking from others, of outperforming rivals, of gaining advantages at the expense of the field, as the precise opposite of the creative plane. And urgency, he argues, is what drives the mind from the creative plane to the competitive plane. A person who feels the pressure of not enough time will almost inevitably begin to think in terms of competition, of who is ahead, of what edge they lack, of what others possess that they do not. These competitive thoughts are not merely unpleasant, they are the impressions of scarcity placed upon the formless, and they directly contradict the impression of creative abundance that the formula requires. Urgency, competitive thought, and the impression of scarcity form a single complex, and the absence of urgency is the single intervention that dissolves all three simultaneously. The student who has encountered this principle before, who has read chapter 11, who has understood the counsel to avoid urgency, and who has still not been able to fully remove urgency from their practice deserves a precise answer to the question of why. The answer is not weakness of will or insufficiency of desire. The answer is that urgency cannot be removed by decision alone. It is removed by the sustained practice of the elements that precede it in the formula. A mind that holds a clear vision as present reality, that is oriented by genuine gratitude, and that rests in the certainty of faith. That mind does not generate urgency, because urgency requires the perception of a gap between the current state and the desired state. And the first three elements of the formula, fully operative, close that gap in consciousness before the fourth element, action, is ever taken. Urgency is not removed. It becomes structurally impossible. That is the certain way. What Wattles names in this element is something that the classical philosophical tradition recognized in a different vocabulary. The Stoics named it equanimity, not as emotional flatness, but as the unshakable stability of one whose inner state is governed by principle rather than by circumstance. The Aristotelian tradition named it the sovereign activity of the rational soul, the state in which the highest faculties of the human person are fully operative and undistracted by the passions that reduce the quality of action. The Buddhist traditions named it non-attachment, not the absence of desire, but the absence of the suffering that arises from the identification of the self with the outcome of desire. Wattles places this ancient insight in the specific operational context of creative law. The absence of urgency is the condition under which the formless receives the impression of one who is already in dominion over the desired result. And that impression, the impression of dominion, of certainty, of already having, is the only impression that the law can respond to by producing the corresponding material conditions. The final point to be made about the no urgency element concerns its relationship to time, because Wattles's formulation makes a specific and unusual claim about the practitioner's relationship with temporal succession. The certain way operates in the present moment, not because the past and future are irrelevant, but because the formless receives impressions only from the mind as it exists in this moment. A vision held in this moment as present reality places the impression of present reality. A gratitude felt in this moment for the vision as a received gift places the impression of reception. The faith that arises in this moment is the certainty of this moment. The action taken in this moment is complete only because the whole person is in this moment. And urgency, the anxiety about the distance between now and the desired future, is precisely the act of evacuating the present moment and taking up residence in the future instead. This is why Wattles places such insistence on the completeness of present action, not as a productivity principle, but as a metaphysical prescription. The present moment is the only moment in which the formula can operate. Urgency, by definition, abandons the present moment, and in abandoning it, urgency abandons the only temporal location in which the law of creative substance can receive the conditions it requires. Chapter 11 of The Science of Getting Rich contains a prescription that, on a first reading, appears to be advice about the quality of work. Do all that you can do in a perfect manner every day, but do it without haste, without worry, and without fear. Students who have read this sentence typically receive its first clause as the meaningful instruction and its second clause as the pleasant qualifier. They understand it to mean work hard and try not to stress too much. This reading inverts the order of importance. The second clause, without haste, without worry, without fear, is the operative instruction. The first clause describes the output. The second clause describes the inner condition that makes that output possible. The word perfect in Wattles' usage does not mean flawless. It does not mean that the practitioner must achieve technical excellence in every act, or that any imperfection in execution disqualifies the action from its creative function. Perfect, in this context, has its etymological meaning: complete, whole, fully brought to its natural end. An action is perfect, in Wattles' sense, when the full attention and energy of the person performing it has been brought to bear upon it, without division, without reservation, without part of the mind allocated elsewhere. A letter written perfectly is a letter that has received the writer's complete attention for the time it required. A conversation held perfectly is a conversation in which the speaker's full intelligence was present. The quality of the external output may vary. The completeness of the inner state does not. Why does completeness of action matter to the formless substance? This is the question that Wattles' prescription demands, and it is one he addresses through the logic of impression. Each action in his framework places an impression on the formless, not in addition to the primary impression of the vision, but as a continuous, moment-by-moment statement about the inner position of the person acting. An action performed with divided attention, with part of the mind absorbed in the present task, and another part monitoring whether the law is working, whether results are coming, whether enough is being done quickly enough, places the impression of a divided person. A person whose mind is divided between the present and the future is, in Wattles' precise sense, a person who is not yet operating from the certainty of arrival. And a person who is not yet certain of arrival is, by that very uncertainty, placing the impression of one who has not yet arrived. This understanding transforms what might otherwise appear to be a counsel of mindfulness into something with significantly higher stakes. The requirement for complete present action is not about personal productivity or the psychological benefits of being present. It is about the precise nature of the impression that the creative mind places upon the formless substance in every single act it performs. Each act is a communication to the creative medium of the universe about the inner state of the practitioner. A complete act communicates certainty, dominion, and creative authority. An incomplete act, one tainted by urgency, by divided attention, by the monitoring energy that asks, "Is this working?" communicates doubt, incompleteness, and the inner position of one who is waiting for an outcome, rather than expressing one who already knows. The practical implication of this is demanding in a way that most students have not fully absorbed. Wattles is not asking for complete attention only during the designated practice time. The morning vision session, the gratitude practice, the moments of conscious application, he is asking for complete attention in every action throughout the entire day. Every conversation, every task, every interaction with the outer world is an opportunity to either express the inner state of the certain way or to contradict it. A person who practices the formula with precision in the morning and then spends the day in distracted, urgency-driven action is sending two contradictory impressions to the formless. And the cumulative impression of a full day of urgency will, by sheer volume, overwhelm the impression of a single morning's careful practice. The element of complete present action also has an important relationship with the element of faith, and this relationship illuminates why the dependency chain runs in the direction it does. Faith, the felt certainty of arrival, is not merely the cause that makes complete action possible. It is also the output that complete action, once performed, reinforces and deepens. A person who performs an action completely without urgency, without divided attention, experiences the act from the inner position of one who is already operating in the desired state. That experience, the lived experience of acting from creative certainty rather than from desperate pursuit, is itself a confirmation of faith. Each complete action reinforces the faith that produced it, which deepens the gratitude that generated the faith, which sharpens and stabilizes the vision that gave the gratitude its object. The formula, once fully operative, is self-reinforcing. Each element, fully expressed, enriches and deepens every other element. This is the dynamic quality of the certain way as a living inner architecture. It does not merely sustain itself, it develops. There is a further dimension to the completeness requirement that Wattles implies throughout Chapter 11 and states most clearly in his discussion of the advancing person. The practitioner of the certain way does not perform complete actions in order to impress the formless. They perform complete actions because complete action is the natural expression of a person operating from a state of creative certainty. The completeness is not strategic, it is genuine. This distinction matters because it reveals something about the quality of inner state required. A person who performs complete actions as a technique, who is watching themselves be complete, monitoring their absence of urgency, checking whether they are achieving the required quality, is in that very monitoring dividing their attention and thereby failing to be complete. The completeness Wattles describes is the completeness of one who is so genuinely oriented in the certainty of the formula that there is no part of the mind available for self-monitoring. The eye cannot see itself. The creative mind, fully operative, cannot observe itself being creative. It is simply, completely in the act. This leads to an observation that, properly understood, reveals the depth of what Wattles is asking. The full practice of the certain way requires a level of inner integration, a unity of vision, feeling, certainty, and action that no isolated technique can produce. It is not the product of a morning practice. It is the product of a progressive inner transformation in which the 5 elements of the formula are practiced with increasing consistency until they become the natural default state of the practitioner's inner life, rather than a condition that must be deliberately established. Wattles alludes to this in his description of what he calls the advancing person, the person who has made the certain way sufficiently habitual that it operates as the background condition of all their thinking and acting, rather than as a foreground effort. The advancing person does not try to be without urgency. They have, through sustained practice of the formula, reached the inner position in which urgency has no ground to stand on. The vision is too clear, the gratitude too genuine, the faith too settled, and the action too complete for urgency to find a crack through which to enter. The completeness of present action also carries a specific implication for the relationship between the practitioner and the outer world, with other people, with circumstances, with events that appear to contradict the vision or to delay its material expression. Wattles is explicit that the certain way does not require the practitioner to evaluate outer circumstances as confirmations or disconfirmations of the formula's operation. Outer circumstances are effects, not evidence. The practitioner who interrupts the completeness of present action to assess whether the outer world is responding, who looks at current conditions and adjusts their inner orientation based on what they see, has reversed the causal direction of the formula. They are allowing effects to determine causes, which is the precise opposite of the certain way's logic. Complete present action is, in part, defined by its indifference to the current state of outer conditions, not because outer conditions are unimportant, but because they are always and only effects, and the practitioner's relationship is with the cause, not the effect. There is a convergence between this element and the broader philosophical tradition of causa efficiens, the efficient cause in Aristotelian terms, the force by which a potential is actualized into a form. In Wattles's framework, the practitioner of complete present action is the efficient cause of the material conditions they seek to create. But the efficient cause must be whole. It must bring the full force of its nature to bear upon the medium it is shaping. A partial cause produces a partial actualization, not a partial version of the intended form, but an incomplete act of causation that leaves the potential in an indeterminate state. The completeness of each action is, in this precise philosophical sense, the completeness of the creative cause, and a complete cause applied to the receptive medium of the formless substance through the clear impression of a specific vision held in the orientation of genuine gratitude, resting in the certainty of faith, and uncontaminated by urgency. That complete cause produces, with the mechanical precision that Wattles attributes to natural law, the corresponding effect in the material world. The most common partial application of the certain way has a recognizable structure, and it is worth examining it with clinical precision, not because identifying the failure is satisfying, but because the exact shape of the failure reveals the exact nature of the missing element. The most common partial formula is vision plus gratitude, held with sincerity, practiced with consistency, often supplemented by readings of the text and regular returns to the conceptual framework. Students who apply this partial formula are not casual practitioners. They are often among the most serious readers of Wattles, the ones who have studied the text most carefully and applied it most conscientiously. And they encounter a specific, recognizable failure pattern, a period of genuine alignment, a sense of expanded possibility, brief episodes of what feels like creative momentum, and then a plateau or a return to prior conditions with no material change proportionate to the sincerity of the practice. The failure, stated precisely, is not in the vision or the gratitude. Both may be present with genuine quality. The failure is in the element that neither vision nor gratitude alone is capable of producing: faith. Not general optimism or intellectual conviction about the law's validity, but the specific felt certainty of arrival that Wattles places as the third element in the dependency chain. Faith, as established earlier, is the natural output of sustained, genuine gratitude. But sustained carries more weight in this sentence than most students grant it. Sustained means uninterrupted over time, consistent in quality, not performed on some days and abandoned on others, not maintained until the first sign of outer non-response and then quietly replaced by hope. The faith that the dependency chain produces is the product of gratitude that has been held long enough and with enough genuineness that the vision has been fully received by the practitioner's consciousness as an already completed reality. That level of sustained gratitude is harder to achieve than most practitioners recognize. And the partial formula, vision plus gratitude without full faith, is the state of a person who has begun the chain but has not completed it. The action that proceeds from this incomplete chain is the action of someone who is waiting to see if this will work. Wattles identifies this quality of action with precision in Chapter 14. It is the action of hope rather than certainty, the action of the person who has placed their bet and is watching to see if they have won, rather than the action of the person who already knows the outcome and is acting accordingly. The external behavior may be identical. Two practitioners may take the same actions in the same domain with the same frequency, but the inner origin of those actions, one from hope, one from certainty, places fundamentally different impressions on the formless. The action from hope places the impression of a person who does not yet know. The action from certainty places the impression of a person who already does. And the formless, which responds to impression, responds accordingly. There is a compounding dynamic in this partial formula trap that makes it particularly difficult to exit without a full understanding of the dependency chain. The student who applies vision plus gratitude sincerely but without full faith will take action from hope. Actions taken from hope produce results that are uncertain, sometimes confirming, sometimes not. When outer conditions confirm, the student's hope temporarily rises toward something resembling faith. When outer conditions do not confirm, hope falls, and the student must re-establish the practice from the beginning. This cycle of rising and falling hope, mistaken for the fluctuating expression of faith, is self-perpetuating. It keeps the practitioner in permanent oscillation between brief alignment and return to baseline, never accumulating the sustained inner position that would allow true faith to crystallize. The exit from this cycle is not more effort or longer practice sessions. It is the recognition that genuine gratitude, held consistently enough to produce real faith, is the only thing that breaks the oscillation, and that the quality of the gratitude is the variable that determines whether the cycle continues or ends. The partial formula trap also has a second common variant that deserves naming, because it is structurally different from the first and produces a different failure pattern. This variant is vision plus faith. The practitioner who has a clear image of the desired result and a strong intellectual conviction about the law's power, but who has not developed genuine gratitude as the connecting element. The failure pattern here is different. This practitioner tends to take vigorous action with high initial confidence, but finds that the action lacks the quality of completeness. There is always a subtle monitoring energy, a watching of results, an assessment of whether the law is responding. This monitoring quality is the signature of faith that has been manufactured by willpower, rather than produced by genuine gratitude. Manufactured faith is inherently fragile. It must be actively maintained, which means part of the practitioner's attention is always occupied with sustaining it. That divided attention is precisely the condition of incomplete action, which places the impression of a person whose mind is not entirely in the creative plane. And the partial results that follow are, again, the natural expression of an incomplete cause. The anxiety contamination that flows from the absence of the no-urgency element represents a third and particularly pernicious partial formula, because it operates not by the absence of an element, but by the corruption of all elements simultaneously. A practitioner who has, to some degree, all 5 elements present, vision, gratitude, faith, right action, and even a nominal commitment to non-urgency, but who carries a persistent background anxiety about timing, about results, about whether enough is being done quickly enough, is not practicing the certain way. They are practicing a version of it that has been contaminated at the level of inner position. The vision is present, but held with the anxiety of someone who is not sure it will arrive. The gratitude is present, but performed with the subtle tension of someone who is grateful for what they hope will come, rather than for what they know is already given. The faith is present as a cognitive position, but not as a felt certainty, because the anxiety that coexists with it makes certainty impossible. And the action, taken with all of this present, is action from the position of a person who is trying, and the impression of trying is the impression of one who has not yet achieved. The precise failure mechanism of anxiety contamination reveals something about the nature of the formless substance's response that is worth establishing explicitly. The formless does not evaluate intentions or efforts. It responds to impressions, to the quality of the mental form that the thinking mind places within it. When the dominant impression is the image of creative certainty and present wholeness, the formless responds by moving the conditions of the outer world toward correspondence with that image. When the dominant impression is the image of striving, of not yet having, of anxious pursuit, even if this impression is carried within a practice that nominally includes all 5 elements, the formless responds to that dominant impression. The quality of the impression is determined not by what the practitioner intends, but by what the practitioner actually is in this moment. This is not a harsh judgment. It is the precise description of a mechanical law operating without regard for the practitioner's preferences. Understanding the partial formula trap at this level of precision has one immediate, actionable implication that the student can apply without delay. The question to ask is not, am I doing the practice? It is not, do I have a vision? Am I practicing gratitude? Do I believe in the law? Those are questions about the presence of nominal elements. The question that the certain way demands is, What impression am I actually placing on the formless right now? That question, asked with genuine honesty, will reveal more about the completeness or incompleteness of the formula's operation than any external assessment of how consistently the practice has been maintained. The impression you're actually placing in this moment is determined by your genuine inner position, not by your intended position, not by the elements you have nominally assembled, but by what is actually operative in your consciousness as you read these words. That is the diagnostic, and it is available to you at any moment, in any condition, without reference to the history of your practice. The partial formula trap has one more structural feature that must be named before moving to application: the role of incomplete understanding in perpetuating it. Most students who are trapped in partial application are not trapped by weakness or by lack of desire to apply the formula completely. They are trapped because they have never had access to the formula in its assembled form. They know the elements, but they don't know the dependency chain. They know that vision matters, but they don't know precisely what vision must do, what impression it must place, in what quality, held in what inner position. They know that gratitude is important, but they do not know that it is the mechanism that converts vision from a future desire into a present reality in consciousness. They know that urgency is bad, but they do not know that it is not merely a negative condition to be avoided, but an active element of the formula that, when present, breaks every other element it touches. The reconstruction of the formula from its source chapters, completed in the preceding sections of this account, is not an academic exercise. It is the supply of the exact information that the partial formula trap requires to be dissolved. The contamination of urgency is described by Wattles as an operative fact rather than as an emotional observation, and the difference in framing matters enormously for how the practitioner understands their own experience. When urgency is described as a negative emotion to be avoided, the practitioner relates to it as something to suppress, manage, or move through. When urgency is described as a specific impression placed upon the formless substance, an impression that directly announces the inner position of a person in a state of absence, the practitioner understands that urgency is not merely uncomfortable. It is informationally destructive. It is the communication of the precise condition that the certain way is designed to transcend, sent in the very act that is supposed to transcend it. The contamination mechanism operates through the same principle by which a single drop of a foreign substance can render a precise chemical solution inert. The solution may contain every required component in the correct proportion, but the foreign substance binds to the active elements and prevents them from performing their function. Urgency is the foreign substance in the certain way. Its presence does not reduce the solution's potency gradually. It neutralizes the active elements by altering the fundamental quality of what is present in consciousness. And this neutralization is not an occasional disruption. It is continuous as long as urgency is present, because urgency is not an event, but a condition, an ongoing inner position from which thinking, feeling, and acting all proceed. Consider what urgency does to vision first. The clear, living, specific vision of the desired result, held as already existing in the formless substance, requires a specific quality of inner relationship with the image, the quality of one who already has it, who is receiving it, who is grateful for its presence. Urgency cannot occupy this relationship. Urgency is the orientation of one who does not yet have what is urgently desired. If it were already possessed, urgency would have no object. The moment urgency enters the act of holding the vision, it transforms the quality of the relationship with the vision from one of reception to one of pursuit. The image may be identical in both cases, but the impression placed upon the formless is entirely different. One impression says, "This already exists, and I am receiving it." The other says, "This does not yet exist, and I am pressing toward it." These are opposite impressions. The law responds to both with equal mechanical precision and with opposite results. Consider next what urgency does to gratitude. Genuine gratitude in Wattles' framework is the act of treating the vision as an already received gift from the formless substance, relating to the desired result as something already given rather than something hoped for. Urgency, when it enters the practice of gratitude, does not simply reduce its quality. It fundamentally alters the object of gratitude. Gratitude practiced under urgency becomes gratitude for what the formless has not yet done, a kind of forward-looking appreciation that acknowledges desired goods as coming rather than as given. This is not gratitude in Wattles' sense. It is hope dressed as gratitude, and hope in the certain ways dependency chain is not the operative state. Certainty is. The difference between hope and certainty is not a degree. It is a categorical distinction of inner position, and urgency, by introducing the consciousness of temporal gap, ensures that the distinction always resolves in favor of hope. Faith is the element most visibly and immediately destroyed by urgency, because the felt certainty of arrival that Wattles calls faith is structurally incompatible with the felt uncertainty of urgency. A person who is certain of arrival does not feel urgency about arrival. They may feel purposeful, engaged, even intensely active. But urgency, specifically, is the signal of potential non-arrival, the alarm of a system that perceives a threat to the achievement of the desired outcome. And this alarm is precisely what faith, in its genuine form, silences. The practitioner who experiences urgency while attempting to sustain faith is experiencing the evidence that their faith is not yet genuinely established, that it remains at the level of a cognitive position rather than a felt certainty. This is not a moral failure. It is a diagnostic signal, and the correct response to it is not to suppress the urgency by willpower, but to return to the element that produces faith. Genuine gratitude, sustained until the felt certainty arises naturally. When urgency contaminates the fourth element, complete present action, the result is the condition Wattles describes with the phrase haste. Haste is not fast action. Fast action can be complete. Haste is the quality of action that proceeds from the inner position of not enough time, of too much at stake, of results that are not arriving quickly enough. Haste divides the attention. Part of it is on the present act, and part of it is on the future result that the act is supposed to produce. This division is the precise negation of complete present action. The action performed in haste is an action from which some portion of the practitioner's creative force has been withheld, not from lack of effort, but from the structural division of attention that urgency demands. The impression it places on the formless is the impression of a divided person, and a divided person is, in the inner architecture of the certain way, a person who is not yet fully in the creative plane. The particularly insidious quality of urgency as a contaminant lies in the fact that it is self-masking. Urgency presents itself in the culture of achievement as the indicator of genuine desire, real commitment, and authentic ambition. A practitioner who feels urgency interprets it as confirmation that they truly want the result, that they are not being passive or indifferent. This interpretation actively resists the certain ways requirement for the no urgency condition, because accepting the requirement appears to demand a sacrifice of the very quality the practitioner has identified as their most reliable proof of their own commitment. This is the trap within the trap. The element whose removal is most necessary is the element that most convincingly masquerades as a virtue. Wattles' prescription, never think of yourself as on the way, is, among other things, a surgical intervention in this self-masking mechanism. It does not ask the practitioner to desire less. It asks them to distinguish with precision between genuine creative desire and the urgency that has taken up residence alongside it. The contamination model also exposes why the no urgency requirement is so rarely successfully implemented through direct suppression. A practitioner who attempts to remove urgency by an act of will, by deciding not to feel it, by monitoring for its presence and forcibly replacing it with calm, is engaging in a further division of attention. Part of the mind is now occupied with the task of urgency suppression, which means it is still urgency focused. The internal resistance to urgency is still a form of engagement with it. Wattles does not prescribe the suppression of urgency. He prescribes the construction of an inner state, the specific architecture of vision, genuine gratitude, and faith, that when fully operative, leaves no ground for urgency to occupy. The formula does not fight urgency. The formula, fully assembled and genuinely inhabited, makes urgency structurally impossible. This is the distinction between technique and inner architecture, and it is the distinction that the reconstructed formula, held as a simultaneous state rather than a sequential procedure, is designed to establish. The anxiety component of the missing no urgency element operates in a slightly different register from urgency proper, and it is worth distinguishing the two with precision. Urgency is a temporal pressure, the sense that time is insufficient and results must be hastened. Anxiety is a qualitative uncertainty, the sense that the desired result might not arrive at all, regardless of timing. Both place the impression of absence on the formless, but their internal signatures are different, and they corrupt different elements of the formula with different emphasis. Urgency most directly attacks vision and action. It distorts the inner position from which the vision is held and hastens the action into incompleteness. Anxiety most directly attacks faith. It introduces the possibility of non-arrival into the inner state that faith defines as the impossibility of non-arrival. Together, urgency and anxiety represent the two primary failure modes of the no urgency element, and the complete formula requires the absence of both, not merely the management of one while tolerating the other. The final observation about anxiety contamination concerns its temporal origin, where it comes from in the practitioner's psychological history, and why this matters for the formula's application. Anxiety about results is almost never generated by the current practice session. It is generated by the accumulated experience of previous incomplete applications, by the memory of previous sincere efforts that did not produce proportionate results, by the internalized conclusion that the law's response is uncertain and must be anxiously monitored. This accumulated anxiety is not irrational. It is the entirely reasonable response of a mind that has observed a pattern. But the pattern it has observed is not the pattern of the complete formula. It is the pattern of fragments. And fragments, as the dependency chain makes clear, produce fragment results. Not because the law is unpredictable, but because incomplete causes produce incomplete effects with the same mechanical precision as complete causes produce complete effects. The anxiety that previous fragment application has generated is itself a fragment, a residue of incomplete practice, and it dissolves not through reassurance or positive reframing, but through the sustained application of the complete formula whose completeness maintained consistently produces results that render the anxiety historically obsolete. The complete formula, as a daily practice, has a specific entry point that is implied throughout Wattles' text and stated most directly in chapters 4, 7, 11, and 14. The entry point is important because it determines the quality of everything that follows. Most practitioners begin their day from the position of responding to obligations, to schedules, to the momentum of the day as it presents itself in its first moments. This responsive position is not neutral. It is the position of one who is being acted upon by circumstances rather than one who is already acting from the inner authority of a clear creative vision. Wattles' prescription is for a fundamentally different relationship with the beginning of the day, and its logic is consistent with every element of the dependency chain. Before any action is taken, the practitioner must establish the inner architecture from which all action will proceed. The first movement in the daily practice is the establishment of the vision. This does not mean a brief mental image held for 30 seconds before the day's activity begins. Wattles' language, throughout the relevant chapters, suggests a quality of engagement with the vision that is better described as making contact, the deliberate, sustained act of bringing the mind into the specific impression of the desired result as it already exists in the formless substance. What makes this different from a standard visualization practice is the quality of the inner relationship with the image. The practitioner is not watching a film of the desired future. They are inhabiting the reality of the desired present, the present as it exists in the formless, prior to its material expression. This is a subtle but decisive distinction. Watching a desired future keeps the mind in the position of observer, looking forward across time. Inhabiting a desired present keeps the mind in the position of the one who already possesses the reality, the inner position from which genuine gratitude can actually proceed. The movement from established vision to genuine gratitude is not an abrupt shift in practice. It is a natural deepening of the same contact. When the vision has been genuinely inhabited, when the practitioner's consciousness has settled into the quality of the desired result as a present reality, gratitude arises with relative naturalness because there is now something real and present to be grateful for. The practitioner begins with the smallest, most undeniable goods, the physical fact of existence, of breath, of cognitive function, of the capacity to hold this practice at all. These are not warm-up objects for gratitude. They are the foundation, the most concrete and irrefutable expressions of the formless substance already giving generously. From that foundation, the gratitude expands gradually and genuinely toward the specific vision. By the time the vision is the object of gratitude, the orientation is already fixed as genuine, not performed, not willed, but genuinely felt, and the impression placed upon the formless is the impression of one who is already receiving. The arising of faith within this sequence is, as the dependency chain predicts, not an act, but a recognition. The practitioner does not generate faith. They notice it. The felt certainty of arrival that is the natural product of a mind that has genuinely inhabited the vision as present reality and genuinely received it in the orientation of gratitude. It is important that the practitioner not try to manufacture this certainty or to extend it artificially beyond its natural quality. Manufactured faith, held by force, maintained by suppression of contrary feeling, is the very condition that produces divided attention and anxious action. Genuine faith arising naturally from genuine gratitude has its own quality, quiet, settled, without the need for confirmation, unshaken by the current state of outer conditions, because it does not derive from the evidence of outer conditions. It derives from the inner position of one who already knows. From within this state, vision clear, gratitude genuine, faith present as quiet certainty, the practitioner takes the first action of the day. The content of the action is determined by what is most immediately available and relevant to the vision's expression in the material world. But its quality is determined entirely by the inner state from which it proceeds. The action must be complete, full attention, zero energy allocated to monitoring whether the law is working, zero urgency about the result that the action will or will not produce. The full person must be in the act for the duration of the act. This is not a heightened state of concentration that must be specially achieved. It is the natural expression of a mind that is genuinely in the first three elements of the formula. A mind that is certain, that is grateful, that is inhabiting the vision as present reality. From such a mind, complete action is not an effort. It is the only thing that makes sense. The maintenance of the no urgency condition throughout every subsequent action of the day is the most demanding element of the daily practice, not because urgency is difficult to identify, but because the conditions that generate it are pervasive and continuous. The practitioner who leaves the entry practice and moves into the day's activity will encounter circumstances that appear to confirm delay, that surface questions about timing, that invite comparison with others who seem further along. Each of these encounters is an invitation to re-enter the urgency condition. Wattles' counsel throughout Chapter 11 is not to resist these invitations through willpower, but to maintain the inner position established in the entry practice with sufficient depth and consistency that the invitations find no traction. The no urgency condition is not the absence of awareness of outer circumstances. It is the presence of an inner position so settled in the certainty of the formula's operation that outer circumstances, whatever their current state, carry no information about whether the formula is working. The daily entry practice, reconstructed from the source chapters, is therefore best understood not as a morning ritual that precedes the day's activity, but as the establishment of an inner state that will either be maintained or abandoned as the day proceeds. The morning practice is meaningful only insofar as the inner architecture it establishes persists through the day's action. A practitioner who carefully and genuinely establishes all 5 elements in the morning and then allows urgency to re-enter within the first hour of activity has not maintained the formula. They have performed it briefly and then abandoned it. Wattles does not speak of the certain way as a morning event. He speaks of it as a way of doing things, a consistent, pervading inner position from which every act throughout the entire day proceeds. The morning practice is the deliberate, focused reestablishment of that position. The rest of the day is its expression. The daily practice also has an important corrective mechanism that Wattles implies through his instruction to return to right action whenever the formula has been disrupted. When urgency, anxiety, or competitive thought enters, as it will in the course of any active engagement with the world, the prescribed response is not self-criticism, not an extended meditation session, not a formal recommencement of the morning practice. It is the immediate application of the dependency chain in the moment. Return to vision. Allow genuine gratitude to fix it as present reality. Notice faith arising. Return to the completeness of the present action and restore the no urgency condition. This corrective sequence can be performed in the space of a breath once the formula is sufficiently familiar and its elements sufficiently practiced. The practitioner who can execute this corrective sequence in real time, in the middle of a conversation, in the midst of a task, at the point of maximum pressure from outer circumstances, is the practitioner Wattles describes as the advancing person, and it is this person who begins to accumulate the sustained inner position from which genuine faith crystallizes and from which material results begin to correspond in proportion. The relationship between the daily entry practice and the quality of outer results deserves one observation that the source text makes explicit and that practice confirms. Results do not begin from the day the practice begins. They begin from the day the inner position becomes genuinely and consistently operative. This is not a discouragement. It is a clarification that protects the practitioner from the most common error in the initial stages of applying the complete formula, the error of monitoring outer conditions for signs of response and adjusting the inner practice based on what is observed. Outer conditions follow inner states, and they follow with a delay determined by the current state of the practitioner's material circumstances and the existing relationships between the various natural forces that must rearrange to produce the desired result. Wattles is explicit. The delay is in the material, not in the law. The law responds immediately to the impression. The material world responds to the law at its own pace. The practitioner's task is to maintain the inner position regardless of the current state of the outer world, and to do so not through grim determination, but through the genuine quality of the vision, gratitude, and faith that make the no urgency condition natural rather than forced. The daily entry practice, then, understood in the fullness of what Wattles describes, is not a technique for producing results. It is the daily, deliberate inhabiting of the inner position that is the certain way. The 5 elements simultaneously present in their correct inner sequence, maintained with genuine quality throughout every act of the day. Results are not the goal of the practice. They are the natural, inevitable mechanically predictable consequence of the practice when the practice is complete. This distinction between the practice as a means to an end and the practice as an inner position that, fully inhabited, produces the end as naturally as a cause produces its effect, is the distinction between the student who is trying the certain way and the student who is living it. Wattles wrote the book for the latter. The reconstruction of the formula that has been performed in this account is the bridge between the two. At any moment of the day, without ceremony or formal interruption of activity, the practitioner of the complete formula can run a 5-point diagnostic check against the elements of the certain way. This is not a self-help practice or a mindfulness exercise. It is the real-time verification of the inner position against the requirements of the law. The practitioner taking the role of the scientist who checks the conditions of an experiment against the requirements of the formula to ensure that what they are observing is actually the law in operation and not some other process entirely. The check proceeds through 5 precise questions, each of which requires an honest answer rather than a desired one. The 5 questions correspond to the 5 elements in their dependency order. The first question is about the vision. Am I currently thinking of the desired result as something that already exists in the formless substance, as a present reality being received? Or am I thinking of it as something I am trying to get, as a future state I am pressing toward? The distinction is not subtle once it has been clearly named. The inner sensation of trying to get is recognizably different from the inner sensation of receiving. Trying to get has the quality of effort, of reaching, of a gap between the self and the desired object. Receiving has the quality of acceptance, of contact, of the desired object already present within the field of consciousness. If the honest answer to the first question reveals that the vision is being held as a future state to be pursued, the correction is immediate. Re-establish contact with the vision as a present reality in the formless before proceeding to the next question. The second question is about gratitude. Is genuine gratitude the current inner orientation, or has the underlying quality of the orientation shifted to hope, to want, to the awareness of what is not yet materially present? This question is more sensitive than the first because gratitude can be easily performed without being genuine. The practitioner who asks this question must be willing to receive the honest answer, which sometimes is, no, the current orientation is more accurately described as hope than as genuine gratitude. This is not a failure to be criticized. It is information to be acted upon. The correction is to return to the most concrete, undeniable present goods and to re-establish the genuine quality of gratitude from that foundation before attempting to extend it toward the vision. The third question is about faith. Is the felt certainty of arrival actually present, or is the current state more accurately described as hope or optimism, the belief that the law might work rather than the certainty that it is already working? This question is the most revealing of the 5 because the honest answer to it tells the practitioner exactly how well the first 2 elements are currently performing their functions. If vision is genuinely being held as present reality and gratitude is genuinely fixing it as already given, faith is present. Its presence is not a matter of effort. If it is absent, if the current state is more accurately described as hopeful than certain, the diagnosis is clear. Return to vision. Return to genuine gratitude. Allow faith to arise from the genuine quality of those elements rather than attempting to manufacture it directly. The fourth question is about the completeness of present action. Is the current action being performed with full attention, with zero energy allocated to monitoring whether the law is working, without urgency about what comes next? The answer to this question is immediately available in the quality of the practitioner's attention in this moment. Divided attention is physically perceptible, the sensation of part of the mind being elsewhere, of the current act not having the full weight of the person's creative force behind it. Complete attention is equally perceptible. The whole person is present in the act, and the act is receiving everything. If the answer reveals divided attention or urgency about the next step, the correction is to close the division, to return the full quality of attention to the present act, not by suppressing the wandering part of the mind, but by deepening the inner state of vision, gratitude, and faith until the present act is genuinely the only place the mind wishes to be. The fifth question is the most comprehensive. Is the no urgency condition present throughout all of the above? Not as a performance of calm, but as the genuine absence of the pressure of temporal gap and the anxiety of potential non-arrival. This question functions as the atmospheric check, the assessment of whether the condition under which every other element must operate is genuinely present. If urgency or anxiety is found anywhere in the complex of the first four elements, the formula is broken at the point of their presence, and the correction follows the dependency chain. Return to vision. Return to genuine gratitude. Allow faith to arise. Restore the completeness of action, and observe whether urgency, now without the ground of a not yet arrived vision, begins to dissolve. The 5-point check is designed to be executed in real time, not as a lengthy self-examination, but as a rapid diagnostic pass through the elements in sequence, taking whatever time is needed at the element where the check reveals a disruption. A practitioner who runs this check with genuine honesty and executes the correction at the point of disruption is, in the act of correction itself, practicing the certain way. The check is not an assessment of how well the formula has been applied in the past. It is the formula applied in the present moment. And the certain way, as Wattles establishes throughout Chapter 11, operates in the present moment only. There is no cumulated credit from previous correct application, and there is no permanent damage from previous incorrect application. There is only the quality of the inner position in this moment, which is available to correction and re-establishment at any point in any day, regardless of what has preceded it. The cumulative effect of consistent application of the 5-point check is the progressive stabilization of the complete formula as the default inner state, the condition that Wattles describes in his account of the advancing person. Each correction reinforces the practitioner's familiarity with the felt quality of each element, which makes the diagnostic more precise and the correction faster in subsequent applications. Over time, the formula does not need to be deliberately reestablished as frequently because its elements have been practiced sufficiently that their presence is more natural than their absence. The check then becomes not a corrective tool, but a quality verification, a brief confirmation that the inner architecture is fully operative, rather than an emergency repair. This is the trajectory of practice that the complete formula, applied with the precision that the source text and this reconstruction make possible, is designed to produce. The certain way formula, assembled from the 5 source chapters in which Wattles distributed its elements, has now been named, sequenced, and examined from every angle its structure demands. Before stating it in its final form, it is worth pausing to observe what the reconstruction reveals about the nature of the text itself. The Science of Getting Rich is not a book that withholds its essential content from the casual reader. Every element of the formula is explicitly present in the text. What the text withholds, by architectural decision, as argued at the opening of this account, is the assembly. The reconstruction performed here is not an interpretation of Wattles's meaning. It is the explicit reading of what he stated in 5 different places, arranged in the sequence that the dependency chain demands. Everything confirmed here is in the book. The book has always contained the formula in its complete form. The dependency chain, traced from its first element to its last, reveals a structure of breathtaking internal coherence. Vision provides the specific impression. Genuine gratitude fixes it as present reality. Faith arises from gratitude as its natural consequence. Complete present action expresses the certainty that faith establishes. The absence of urgency is the pervading condition under which every element operates correctly. Each element does precisely what it must do to enable the next. Each element's failure precisely prevents the next element from achieving its genuine form. The chain is not 5 separate practices loosely grouped under a common name. It is a single integrated state, a specific quality of interposition that Wattles calls the certain way, because when its conditions are fully met, the outcome is no longer a matter of probability. It is a matter of the mechanical operation of a law. The significance of that word, mechanical, cannot be overstated in evaluating the full claim that Wattles makes. A mechanical law does not respond to effort, to sincerity, to duration of practice, or to the strength of desire. It responds to the complete and correct set of conditions. A law of chemistry does not reward the chemist who works hardest at producing a reaction. It produces the reaction when and only when the required elements are present in the required form and proportion. Wattles makes this claim for the certain way with equal explicitness. The law works when its conditions are met, and it works with the same precision and indifference to personal circumstance as any other natural law. The formula is the complete set of conditions. The assembly of the formula is the work of meeting those conditions fully. The practitioner who holds this formula in its complete, assembled form, who understands not merely that 5 elements exist, but what each one does, why the sequence is a dependency chain and not a preference, why the absence of urgency is an active element and not a passive state, and what complete present action requires of the inner life. That practitioner is in possession of something qualitatively different from what a reading of the original text alone provides. They are in possession of the complete set of conditions. What they do with that possession is determined not by further knowledge, but by the consistency and genuineness with which they inhabit the formula as a living inner architecture, rather than as a theoretical framework they have understood. The final statement of the formula is this: a clear, living, specific vision of the desired result held as already existing in the formless substance. Continuous, genuine gratitude as the fixed inner orientation that receives the vision as a present good. Faith arising naturally from that gratitude as the felt certainty of arrival. Each present action performed completely, with full attention and no energy withheld for urgency or monitoring. And the total absence of urgency, anxiety, and competitive thought pervading every element simultaneously. These 5 elements, present at the same time and in their correct inner sequence, constitute the certain way. It was always in the book. The weight of what has just been assembled requires a moment of stillness before the full implication is allowed to arrive. If the certain way is indeed what this reconstruction reveals, a dependency chain of 5 specific elements, each with a precise function, each enabling the next, and all requiring the simultaneous absence of urgency as their pervading condition, then the question that demands honest engagement is not, does this work? Wattles does not ask for that question, and neither does the law. The law does not require the practitioner's belief in its operation. The law requires the complete set of its conditions. The question that matters is a different one, and it is more demanding of the 5 elements of the certain way formula. Which one are you genuinely and consistently providing, and which one is the element whose absence or contamination has broken the formula in your practice? This question is not rhetorical. It is the most important practical question that can be derived from the reconstruction performed in this account. The formula, fully assembled, is now legible to you in a way it may not have been before. You can now read it not as a general philosophy of abundance, but as a specific set of conditions, each with a name, a function, a position in the sequence, and a precise failure mode. The student who can look at this formula and identify with honest precision the element that is missing or corrupted in their practice, that student has already accomplished the most important cognitive act, because a missing element that has been precisely identified is an element that can be supplied. A formula that is incomplete in a named way is a formula that is one correction away from being complete. Wallace Wattles wrote at the opening of The Science of Getting Rich that the book was a practical manual, not a philosophical treatise. He meant this with full sincerity. The philosophy is present in the text, and it is present with extraordinary depth and coherence. But the philosophy is always in the service of the practice. Every philosophical argument Wattles makes is an argument for why a specific element of the certain way works the way it does, why vision must be specific, why gratitude must be genuine, why urgency must be absent. The philosophy explains the mechanism. The practice is the operation of the mechanism, and the operation of the mechanism, in the only place where it can operate, in the present moment, in the inner life of the practitioner, is entirely within your dominion. The concept of dominion is the appropriate philosophical category with which to close the substantive argument of this account, and it is one that Wattles himself employs in his discussion of the creative versus the competitive plane. The practitioner of the certain way operates from dominion, from the inner position of one who already exercises creative authority over the conditions of their life, not through force of will over outer circumstances, but through the quality of the impressions they place upon the formless substance. Dominion, in this sense, is not superiority over others. It is sovereignty over the quality of one's own inner state, the capacity to inhabit the 5 elements of the formula consistently, regardless of outer conditions, and to execute the corrective sequence immediately when any element is disrupted. This sovereignty is available to any practitioner who knows the formula precisely enough to inhabit it. The reconstruction performed here is the provision of that precision. It is also worth stating, with the directness that the subject deserves, what changes when the formula is finally applied in its complete form, rather than in fragments. It is not that the outer world suddenly rearranges itself dramatically and without apparent cause. The certain way does not promise magic. It promises mechanism. What changes initially and most perceptibly is the quality of the practitioner's inner state, the experience of operating from creative certainty rather than from anxious pursuit. Actions taken from that inner state carry a different quality. They are complete. They place a different impression. The practitioner begins to notice that the interactions, opportunities, and relationships that arise in the course of ordinary activity carry a different quality, that they seem to present themselves in a way that is consistent with the direction of the vision, rather than random or resistant. This is not coincidence, and it is not mysticism. It is the mechanical correspondence between the impression placed upon the formless and the conditions that the formless moves to produce. Wattles describes this correspondence as the operation of natural law. The practitioner who has fully assembled the formula experiences it as the first evidence that the law is already at work. The final truth that the reconstruction of the formula reveals is also its most demanding implication, and it must be stated without softening. The certain way is not difficult because the formula is complex. The formula is remarkably simple. 5 elements in a clear sequence with a clearly stated pervading condition. The certain way is demanding because it requires something that the culture in which most practitioners live has systematically trained them to abandon, the inner position of one who already possesses what they seek. Every urgency-generating mechanism of modern life, every comparison, every timeline, every metric of progress, every social confirmation of where one stands relative to others is a mechanism for reestablishing the inner position of one who does not yet have. The certain way requires the practitioner to hold consistently and genuinely the inner position of one who already does. That is not a technique. It is a form of inner mastery, and Wattles believed, with the conviction of a scholar who had spent years tracing the same law through the history of human thought, that inner mastery of this precise kind was not only possible, but that it was the only reliable path to the outer dominion that every serious student of his work seeks. The reconstruction is complete. The formula has been stated, sequenced, examined at the level of mechanism, and applied as both a daily practice and a real-time diagnostic. What remains is the one thing that the reconstruction by itself cannot do. And this is the point at which the work passes from this account to you. Understanding the formula is a cognitive act. Inhabiting it is something else entirely. The distance between understanding and inhabiting is the distance that no commentary on Wattles can close. It is closed only through the actual, daily, consistent practice of placing all 5 elements in their correct sequence, with genuine quality and maintaining them as the pervading inner condition of every act. That practice is yours to undertake or to decline. The law takes no position on which you choose. There is one question, however, that this account makes it possible to ask with a precision that was unavailable before the formula was assembled in its complete form. Of the 5 elements of the certain way, vision held as present reality in the formless substance, continuous genuine gratitude as the fixed inner orientation, faith arising naturally from that gratitude, each present action performed completely without urgency, and the total absence of urgency and anxiety pervading every element simultaneously. Which one have you been consistently omitting or applying incorrectly? Not in general, and not as a vague impression of where you have room to improve. With precision. The element whose name you can state, whose function you now understand, and whose absence or contamination you can now recognize as the specific cause of the specific failure pattern you have experienced in your practice of this material. The reason precision matters here is the same reason that precision matters in the diagnosis of any incomplete condition. A diagnosis that says something is missing provides no actionable information. A diagnosis that says the third element, faith, is being manufactured by willpower rather than produced by genuine gratitude, because the gratitude practice has not been sustained with sufficient consistency and genuineness to allow faith to arise naturally. That diagnosis provides everything the practitioner needs to execute an immediate, specific correction. The formula is now legible enough for that level of diagnosis. The elements are named, the functions are established, the failure modes have been described. The practitioner who has absorbed this reconstruction now has the necessary vocabulary for a genuine diagnosis of their own practice. Tell us in the comments which element it is. Of the 5 elements of the certain way formula, vision, gratitude, faith, complete present action, and the absence of urgency, which one have you been consistently omitting or applying incorrectly? Be precise. Do not say all of them, unless the honest answer is that you have never applied the formula in its complete form, in which case, naming that is itself a form of precision. State the specific element. State, if you can, the specific way in which it has been missing or corrupted, whether by urgency, by incompleteness, by being manufactured rather than genuine, by being absent from the dependency chain entirely. The student who can name the missing element with that degree of precision has already begun to supply it. The act of precise naming is not merely diagnostic. It is the beginning of the correction. Write it below. And when you have placed the missing element back into its correct position in the sequence, when all 5 are genuinely present simultaneously in the certain way, observe what changes. Not in the outer world, not first, and perhaps not immediately, but in the quality of the inner state from which you take the next action. That quality is the formula in operation. That quality is the certain way. And the certain way, as Wallace Wattles stated more than a century ago, works with the precision of a natural law, not because he declared it so, but because the inner position it establishes corresponds with mechanical accuracy to the creative process of the formless substance from which all material conditions ultimately arise.